Okay, so welcome to another Feature Fridays, and today I'm joined by Tim from Rubrik. So Tim, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for everyone?
Thanks, Guy. Yes, Tim Hines. I've been at Rubrik for about 4 years now, and came in as a specialist focused around automation and public cloud and infrastructure products in general. So really helping customers to get started with using our API and automation and things like that. So
Excellent, excellent. Well, for those who don't know me, my name is Guy Bartram. I'm Product Marketing Manager for Cloud Director suite of products. And today we're talking about how Rubrik kind of plugs into VMware Cloud Director and provides backup and restore services for tenants of Cloud Director. So, Tim, do you want to give me a bit of background on Rubrik as a company before we kind of dive into the detail here? Because folks out there might not know too much about Rubrik.
sure. So Rubrik came to market about 5 years ago, and as a backup provider, and seeking really to take what can be quite complex and can be quite challenging for customers to install and set up and use, and really simplifying that. So our system is based really on a scale out masterless cluster system. So each node in our system will have some storage attached to it. Each node will provide our web interface, and it's really just for customers who are buying Rubrik, it's just deploying one appliance or multiple appliances and just being able to scale like that, and then pointing at all your different applications to be able to back them up. So that could be things like VMware, vSphere, and vCloud Director. Could be things like Microsoft SQL, Oracle, NAS workloads, all sorts, the whole gamut really of what you'd expect.
Okay, cool. So if you're a small service provider or a large service provider with small or large customers, then Rubrik is a very flexible sort of scale out model for backup services for them.
Absolutely, yeah. And we have there's multiple kind of different architectures that you could deploy it in to support those service provider customers. I think we have service provider customers of all sizes across the world and have done since our inception, really. And in some of the slides a bit later on, we'll talk about some of the different architectures that we would recommend for service providers and things.
Okay, well, let's dive into it then. So do you want to take it from the top for some slides today?
Sure. So when it comes to our platform supporting vCloud Director customers, hopefully what you see on the left of the slide here is something that's quite familiar to vCloud Director customers, which is you have your vCloud Director instance or environment, and that's split into different organizations basically. Each organization will have dedicated compute, storage resources, network resources, catalogs, etc. And each organization is going to have its own kind of administrator and different users. So on Rubrik, we tried to mirror that when it came to integrating with vCloud Director. So we have the concept of organizations as well, with the same sort of permissions that you would see in vCloud Director. So that makes it quite easy for customers who are moving on to Rubrik or who are starting to use Rubrik to back up vCloud Director workloads, to kind of map those logical elements across between backup and their production and their front-end vCloud Director systems. We have this policy automation engine. So one of the concepts around making backup simpler with Rubrik was really this idea of an SLA domain. An SLA domain is basically trying to map a business requirement of how an application is protected to a simple policy, basically. So that will say, I want to back up my application this frequently, and I want to maybe replicate the backups to here or send them to an archival location like S3 or something. I want to send that, and all of that is defined in the SLA policy. That policy is then assigned to different objects, and then from there, our scheduler will just go and make sure that it's meeting that requirement, basically. So it'll take the backups automatically. So especially in large environments, the more backup jobs you have in a more typical backup system, the more complex it will become. And the idea with Rubrik is that through this SLA engine, that we can really make it simple to configure, and then as it scales, it doesn't really get more complicated to manage.
So do you get then, is this a way that service providers would tier their offering for their customers using the SLA profiles?
Yeah, so we'll dig into it a little bit more later on, but yeah, you could have different policies. One would say maybe we back up once a day, and one would say maybe we back up every 2 hours, and maybe for
Right.
one, with financial applications, we want to keep that data for 20 years. Maybe for some stuff, for test and dev, we just want to keep it for a week. And so
Yeah.
you can have these different policies which define these different. It could be split by workload, it could be split by the type of data you're backing up or whatever. And that allows service providers to really define those kind of different types of offerings that they may want for different customers. And we can even with I think we'll go into this a little bit later on, but within our when we set up these organizations, then you can say organization A should have access to these SLA domains, and organization B should have access to these ones. So you can offer those to different customers based on what service provider's agreement is for those individual tenants.
Okay, that makes sense. And the CDM, is this something then that's more web-based out as a SaaS service, or is this something that can be installed kind of locally?
So CDM is what we call cloud data management, which is our main backup platform. So that's the scale out clustered system that we talked about. So that'll consist of multiple nodes. Usually in service provider environments, that's going to be installed on the service provider's premises.
Right.
They can start small, maybe with just 3 or 4 nodes, and then they can grow over time. So we have service providers with hundreds of nodes in their environment. And the arrow pointing out to the cloud here really is indicating this concept of archival. So many service provider customers or enterprise customers will choose to put their long-term retention in something like S3 or Azure storage accounts, or maybe an on-premises S3 location or something like that for long-term retention, because it's much more cost-effective per gigabyte.
Yeah. And when you say a node, sorry, can you dive into what you mean by a node?
Yeah, so typically these nodes are a single server. So we have different offerings based on whether you want it on third-party hardware or on our hardware. But it's going to be a unit of compute, so it's going to have some CPU, some memory. It'll have some attached storage, which is dedicated to that specific node, and dedicated network input and output for the node. And then there's going to be probably at least 3 of these in a cluster, but up to many hundreds of them. And then the data is going to be basically dispersed across the multiple nodes for resiliency, and jobs are going to be dispersed across the cluster to allow many jobs to run at once, and for the cluster to not be overloaded, or for a single node to be overloaded. So that's part of this automation engine. Really, is being able to for the workloads to dynamically be dispersed around the cluster. And those clusters could also be a single node, which could be a virtual appliance. So we have a virtual edition of our cluster, which is a single node, which can run in individual tenants' data centers if they've got reasonably small environments.
Right.
So there are different deployment options that are available, but that's what the cluster kind of looks like. It's going to have some compute, some dedicated storage, some memory, and then it's going to be able to form a cluster with more other nodes, basically, to be able to provide more storage and more throughput and things like that.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So that's quite good to see there's kind of options there for using your own hardware, using Rubrik hardware, or using a virtualized appliance as well.
Yeah. Cool. So these are kind of some of the things that we'll talk about a little bit further on in the slides. But I guess some of the key things that we've thought about when we've been designing Rubrik CDM for our service provider customers specifically, which is being able to offer that multi-tenancy and role-based access control, which could allow the service provider to basically go and create all of these different organizations, which may map to VMware Cloud Director organizations, or maybe configured differently, and be able to provide role-based access to that. So that could mean that individual roles within the service provider are able to go and manage protection and recovery and things like that of objects, or it could mean that customers or tenants are allowed to log in themselves and have multiple different roles within the tenant. So as you do with VMware Cloud Director, you could have administrators from on the tenant side, and then you can have users which will have access to certain VApps within there, or maybe be blocked from certain VApps. And then also provide reporting and all that kind of stuff within the tenant itself. So a limited view of the world for those individual tenants, but multi-tenanted within the Rubrik cluster. The service provider solution with flexibility is talking about the different deployment models that we could have. So we'll talk about those a little bit more in another slide, but talking about the virtual deployment of a single node virtual cluster, being able to deploy large clusters in the service provider, and then being able to deploy clusters within enterprise tenants as well, for that, where they have larger requirements than a single node. Providing tenant self-service, and that could be through the multi-tenancy or role-based access control we talked about, or it could be through our vCloud Director plugin, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. And then our platform was built as an API-first platform, so everything that we see through the being carried out through the user interface is all basically backed by REST APIs. Mm-hmm. And this means that service providers are able to automate end-to-end the creation of tenants, the production of machines, and all that kind of stuff, or use multiple tools to be able to automate individual operations, and tenants themselves can use those kind of tools as well to do that. So it gives flexibility in how you manage the system as well.
Okay.
So within the role-based access control here, you can see some examples of how we would do this. So this is on the left-hand side, I guess we have the organizations within vCloud Director, and on the right we have the organizations which are mapped within Rubrik. So we have this full role-based access control available to provide individual permissions to the different organizations that we create within Rubrik. And this allows those users to then go and just log into the Rubrik UI if they want to and start managing protection and recovery tasks. As I said, it gives that reporting, the ability to do reporting in there. And then tenants can create their own SLA domains if the service provider chooses to allow them to do that, or they can pre-prescribe all of the SLA domains and then kind of delegate those out to the individual tenants for them to use to assign to objects. So maybe you would have, because you've got this multi-tenanted system, maybe you would have different locations for archival for each individual tenant. So you would have individual S3 buckets, or maybe one tenant wants to archive over to S3, one wants to keep it on-prem, and one wants to send it to Azure or something. And you could granularly delegate those to individual tenants as well within vCloud Director. So within our organizations, which map to the VCD organization. So you can control where the data flow is. Every tenant's jobs are going to be like closed off from the other tenants. Their reporting and all that kind of stuff as well is going to be, they're going to see only their own view of the world. And then the service provider, of course, can see the whole picture of what's going on. So when it comes to protection, this is kind of the steps that the customer is going to go through. The service provider is going to go through, which is adding the vCloud Director instance into Rubrik. That's going to then discover all of the different virtual data centers underneath it and all of the VApps and everything like that. And then the service provider or the tenant themselves could potentially choose to assign policies, maybe at the vCloud Director instance level if they're wanting to just make sure everything's got a base level of protection, or granularly provide that protection at maybe an org VDC level or a VApp level. And then, as we said before, tenants can then self-serve and log in and manage that protection and manage recovery tasks and things like that. So it makes it very simple for service providers to start protecting everything, but then also gives tenants the ability to really manage their own destiny as they go.
Yeah, and as more backups.
I lost you for a sec, Guy, there. Sorry, say again.
I was saying as that auto discovery feature is particularly useful for tenants as they build more and more infrastructure, not having to worry about onboarding that into the backup process as well.
Yeah, exactly. It gives them one less thing to worry about at the start of their tenancy, and then I guess they can customize it a little bit more as they go and once they find their feet.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's going to provide that kind of automated backup. So no one's going to have to go in and create jobs or anything like that. Think about what time their backups are going to run. They're just going to say, my intent is that we back up this workload twice a day or something like that, and that those backups go to AWS and live there for 3 years. So once you've set it, you can really forget about it, and then you just need to know either is it compliant or is it not compliant, and then you can see that reporting quite easily. So this is specifically around really the plugin access, this slide, but within that plugin, the service provider is going to go and install that into their vCloud Director instance, and then they can map tenants through there with organizations, and they can allow individual tenants access to those organizations through this. So then what's gonna happen is through the vCloud Director menu, they'll see a data protection option. They'll be able to when the tenant logs in, they'll be able to see their own VApps under there, and they'll be able to see when have they been backed up, what policy is assigned to them, carry out protection and recovery operations on them, and view reporting through there as well. So if you don't, as a service provider, if you don't want to give them access to Rubrik's UI, which some service providers want to really minimize the number of services that they're giving access to because it provides a headache in terms of networking and security and things like that, then with this plugin, your tenants can basically manage all of that through the VCD UI, which they're familiar with.
Is there any provider? Sorry to interrupt. Is there any provider jobs that get done through the plugin, or is it just purely tenant access only?
It's really about managing credentials for tenants. So you'd create shared credentials, which would be used by a single tenant, so that each tenant has their own credentials. But you could also have an overarching service account which can manage all of them. But it's really about that managing the tenants within Rubrik. So the service provider's primary interface is probably going to be through the Rubrik UI, and through the plugin here, it's going to be about managing that delegation of access to the different tenants within vCloud Director.
Tim, can I just pause you for a second?
Yeah. So as we said, our platform is built in an API first way. So everything that customers can do through the UI is available through the API. And that means we have integrations with tools like Terraform, Ansible, Puppet. We have a PowerShell module, and these, amongst other things, and these can be used to really help with that, whether it be from the service provider or from the tenant end, to provide that ability for them to automate. So maybe they have pipelines which are deploying VApps and things like that. Well, as part of that pipeline, maybe you'd want to automate the protection of the VApp as part of that. Maybe they have some kind of reporting needs, and they want to write some custom reporting, and you can use the PowerShell module, for example, to do that quite quickly. Or if we've got test and dev on this slide here, and the ability to quickly provide basically no-cost copies of backups to be able to use in that dev test workload is very straightforward using these kind of automation tools as well.
Tell me, what does the instant recovery piece actually mean?
So we have a slide and a demo of actually in a couple of slides time.
Okay.
Cool. So we'll cover it there, but basically it's being able to take a backup and present it up within a couple of minutes, basically, and have it booted within a couple of minutes, so that you can really get your workload back up online very, very quickly, and not be waiting around for lots of data to move about, and then move the object around later. But we'll cover it in a bit more detail in a couple of slides.
Okay.
So I think we kind of covered this a little bit earlier, but basically the service provider is going to add their vCloud Director instance. We're going to auto discover the workload, discover the VApps which sit underneath it. We'll ingest the high-level metadata of those VApps, so how many VMs are in them, what networks are they connected to, all of that kind of stuff. Whether we're protecting them or not, we'll go and figure out all of that information so we're ready to start protecting them. And then it's just a case of really backing up the data. And then depending on where you've assigned our policies to, then we'll start ingesting the VApps and we'll pull the VMs from vCenter and things like that. So then the data is going to be ready to be recovered, basically. And there's a few ways that we can recover that. Our backup is based on like an incremental forever model. So we'll do a full backup the first time, so that can take a little while. But then after that, every time we do a backup, we're just going to be using change block tracking to pull just the change blocks out. So we usually find the first backup can take a little while, although we can ingest through multiple nodes and things like that. So we can speed up that process. But then once the first backup's done, then as long as change block tracking keeps working for us, then we're going to be ingesting really the least amount of data that we can on each backup attempt.
Tell me, what needs to be deployed, if anything, on the host layer or the guest OS layer? Is there agents at all that need to be configured for the backups to run?
Not in order to run, no. So we use VADP on the ESX host to carry out the backups. So that's going to be there by standard, and we'll just interact with that.
Yeah,
it's optional for customers to install an agent on the VMs themselves, and if you do want to, then it can provide an easier path to doing things like application consistency and pre and post scripts than using VM tools. It can be a little bit more reliable sometimes than using VM tools to do those kind of activities. And when it comes to doing restore, then we can push the files directly back to the, if we're doing individual files and things like that, we can push the files directly back to the agent instead of pushing them in through VM tools, which again can be faster and a bit more reliable sometimes. But it's certainly not needed, and I think in service provider environments, then a lot of the time customers will really only install the agent if they have to, like maybe it's a file server or something like that, and you're expecting to do a lot of restores into the guest, but
yeah,
for most workloads, then it's not required, and it certainly won't prevent us taking backups or being able to do restores if it's not there.
Yeah, and I guess you're able to get file level without the agent, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So once we've backed up a virtual machine, we'll basically within our system we'll mount up the disk and we'll index the contents of it. So then you can see all of the data there. And then there's a few options when it comes to doing file restores. You could restore in place. You could restore to somewhere else on the machine, or you could just download it back to the web browser. So there's a few options available there.
And is that one of the things that you can do from the plugin? I know we're going to come to the plugin in a minute, but can you
restore
see the file
files
level listing?
Restore files is available in the plugin.
Okay,
I
cool.
think with the plugin you can't download it back to the browser, but you can restore back to the virtual machine to the same location or a different location within in the machine. So yeah, that's there with the plugin.
Okay.
So when it comes to assigning the SLA domains, as we said, you could do this at the vCloud Director instance level for a base level of protection. You could do it at the org level based on, I guess, maybe you've agreed with the tenant that their organization should have a base level of protection, and then you can get more granular down to the VApp or even the virtual machine level.
Yeah.
Because maybe in a VApp you've got some stuff which is stateless, and you either don't need a backup or you don't need a regular backup, and then you've got some stuff which is super stateful where you're expecting a backup every 30 minutes maybe or something like that. So being able to break down the VApp in that way is going to be important in some cases.
Yeah.
So when we come to restore, you asked about instant recovery. So we say here this is near zero recovery time. So what we're going to do is you're going to go and select your workload, your VApp, and you're going to select a snapshot, and then you're going to select that you want to instantly recover it. And behind the scenes, what this is going to do is it's going to basically take that backup set, and it's going to mount it via NFS back to your vSphere cluster, and then it's going to, in the case of instant recovery, it's going to take the disks from the existing virtual machine. It's going to rename the existing virtual machine, and then it's going to add the VMX file back into vSphere from the presented snapshot over NFS. Along with the disks, and then we're going to power that on, and it's going to basically take over the identity of the existing virtual machine. We'll leave the existing virtual machine there just so you can get it back if there's a huge problem. But by doing this, by presenting that data over NFS, then we're able to basically get that virtual machine booting up within seconds, really. because it's just the time it takes to add an NFS share to your ESX cluster, add the VM or VApp to your inventory, and then power it on. So it's really reducing that time to as short a time as possible. Wow. And then once it's been brought back online, typically that's when customers will want to start moving it back to production, because maybe they'll want to do that out of hours. Maybe they'll be happy to do it straight away, but you don't want to be waiting hours for a large workload to vMotion back to the production data store.
That's impressive, man. I mean, I remember the days you used to have to search through the tape libraries, get the main backup, and then search through for the partial backup, and then do the syncs and do the rest.
I think having been here for a while and having seen this so many times, that it's something we take for granted. But we speak to customers often who are using that kind of process, and they're amazed that they're going from hours or days to be able to restore a machine to having it back within seconds, really.
And again, no one does backup testing because it's such a pain. And with this, you can do backup testing and real functional testing. And like you say, if you didn't want to use VM tools afterwards, you could use the Rubrik agent to do some more sort of application level testing to make sure it's all good.
Yeah, so we have there's on our GitHub site, there's multiple playbooks and things like that where you can basically grab maybe the latest backup or grab backups from a specific day and then boot them up and then inject your own scripts and things like that to be able to go and maybe modify the network and then test the services or test the application in a more thorough way and things like that. So being able to do that at scale is no problem, really. It's like, I think, on each node you could do this with tens of virtual machines, and then once you've got multiple nodes there, you can do it with hundreds of virtual machines at really no cost. It's just the nodes are just sitting there taking backups most of the time and doing the background indexing and things like that. So it's very simple for customers to do this and very quick. As it says here, you can do the full VApp if you want to, or you can just do individual virtual machines within the VApp. This is for the screenshots here are for an export particularly, but basically you can see here we're selecting the virtual machines that we want to restore within the VApp. So you could select all of them or just one or two of them. Choosing here with an export whether you want to export to a new VApp and where that VApp should go to, and then doing network mapping. And this is for an export, which I think there's some slides on it in a couple of slides' time. But here we have a demo of that process. So we'll see, it's a fairly quick demo, but you can see here all of the VApps we've got. So here we can go pick a snapshot for one of the VApps. We'll select Instant Recover. We'll select one of the virtual machines from our VApp to recover. And then we can choose to power on the VApp ourselves if we need to make some reconfiguration before we bring the VApp back up. And then you can see that it's started there, and we can track the task here. And you can see it's powering on the machine there, and this is completely finished there in a duration of 2 minutes. So it's obviously been sped up for the sake of this video, but you can see the process is very quick to be able to go and replace that VM within the VApp, get it back online, get you back up and running, and now you can go and move that virtual machine back across to production storage. So that was the instant recovery process. So really straightforward. Export is something similar, but usually this is used for creating a second copy of that backup. So this is where you protect a snapshot and then go create another copy of it. And again, we can do partial VApp here. We could export a virtual machine from our VApp backup to an existing VApp. So maybe we have like a sandbox VApp we want to push it into, or a test dev type VApp, and we want to take like our SQL server from our production VApp, and we want to export a copy of that into our development environment or something like that. This is where you could do that kind of stuff and be able to tweak the network settings of how that recovery looks, so maybe put it onto a different network or something like that.
Yep.
I think there's a quick demo of that process here. It's a fairly similar process to what we saw for instant recovery there. So again, we'll go in and we'll select our machine, our VApp here, and we can see the different snapshots. We'll go pick a snapshot and we'll select export. and then we can go select partial or full and target it to a new VApp or an existing one. In this demo, we're going to select full VApp and create a new VApp from the entire backup set of that VApp. And we're going to go select our location to do it. So we saw all of the virtual data centers there, but if this was a lockdown tenant user, then we would only see our own VDCs. And then we can go either delete the NICs or map them to an existing network. And again, we'll just wait for that to take place. In this case, with an export, then it's going to go and copy the. It's going to do the same process, basically. I think where we present it over NFS. So yeah, that's the export process basically. So it allows that kind of similar use case, but really focused. I think customers typically use it around test and dev or recovery testing and that kind of thing if they want to do that.
Okay. And that was in the Rubrik UI we were looking at, that cluster.
It was, yeah. There's some demos a little bit later on which show the plugin UI that we have. So customers, our service provider customers, some of them want to use the Rubrik UI and some of them want to use the plugin that we've created, and it depends on how they want to deliver their service and things like that. But yeah, they've got the option there basically. So for our self-service, this is like really around how our organizations work. So we have our cluster will be logically partitioned into tenants. So this could apply for enterprise customers that want to split it by by departments and things like that, or by business units, or for service providers like we're talking about today. So you basically got this large Rubrik cluster, which is going to be a number of nodes, and then you can create basically as many organizations within there as you want, and each organization is going to have their own self-service login basically. So they'll be able to go, if they want to log into our UI, they'll be able to go to determine which Active Directory groups, single sign-on groups, or manually created users, or whatever it may be, should have which roles on which organization. They can then go sign into them, and each organization will have their set of policies that have been assigned to them, their own set of replication targets and archival targets and things like that. And the MSP can control all of that kind of stuff there.
So is that something, if I had a customer with their own S3 buckets, and then is that something the customer would set up, or using their credentials, or would they just give the credentials to the MSP to configure that for them?
It's really up to the customer, I guess, or up to between the customer and the service provider. So when you add an archival location to Rubrik, then you're basically going to say this is the cloud it lives in, this is the region or whatever, and then here's the credentials for it. And the customer could provide those to the MSP, or the MSP could create it on their behalf. It depends what that service looks like really for that, and whether the customer wants to maintain the keys for that, or whether they're happy for the service provider to manage all of that.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, there's a lot of flexibility there around that kind of stuff, and then the MSP can basically say only this tenant is allowed to use this archival location, and provide the reporting around that and things like that. Yeah. So this slide kind of covers some of the different deployment options that we have for Rubrik with vCloud Director and our MSP type customers. So here we have basically the MSP's data center. They have vCloud Director running in their data center, in the MSP data center, and the Rubrik cluster is just going to be directly connected to that vCloud Director instance and backing up those kind of workloads there. So this is kind of the fully hosted, like infrastructure as a service type platform. Yep. And then we have customers where, which this could be a remote type office where they have remote workloads, but they also maybe have a mixture of the first one as well, which is like a mixture of the fully hosted and the remote workloads. But here we'll have basically what we call Rubrik Air, which is our virtual appliance, and that's going to be running on the customer's site. So that could be, that's probably going to be running as a virtual machine on an ESX cluster. It's going to have a limited amount of storage on there, so we're saying 10 terabytes per instance here. So that's going to allow, in that remote office site, that'll probably be sufficient. But if it's larger than that, then the next kind of deployment option will cover that. But if you've got up to 10 terabytes of data, the customer's going to run this virtual appliance. They're going to back up their workloads from their local site there, and then they're going to replicate that back to the MSP's data center. So if there's a problem with the branch office and they encounter some data loss, then we know the MSP has a copy back at their main site there. So that's really geared at that kind of site. So for MSPs which have a lot of small customers, this is a good deployment option for them, basically.
Do you do any WAN optimization at all, deduplication?
Yeah. So when we write to our file system, then we're going to dedupe it at that point. But also when we replicate, then we're going to see which blocks are already existing at the target site. Right. So we're not going to send those blocks again. We're going to dedupe what we send across there, and then we optimize the stream somewhat as well for the not smashing those WAN links too hard.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the third option really is kind of having that still that central MSP home hub for the data, but then this is really good at enterprises where they've got more data than 10 terabytes. Maybe they have hundreds of terabytes or more, but in those customers, they're going to run a physical cluster of Rubrik, which is going to be 4+ nodes. It could be racks and racks of the kit, but depending on how much data they have. And again, they're going to replicate that back to the MSP data center. So, and then the customer.
Yeah, I think it's really important this point, because this is really covering like the hybrid use cases that we're seeing a lot of at the moment, where service providers are providing some hosted services, some VCD IS services, and they've got customers out there where they've got their own cloud instances or their own IT structures, which they equally need to back up, but having one common operating model for doing it.
Yeah, and the software is exactly the same, basically. It's just a case of how many nodes are there and things like that. So the interface is exactly the same. In these kind of scenarios, then it could be that the service provider is still delivering all of this that you see on this slide. The service provider is still managing all of that, and then they're just giving the customer using that role-based access to give the customer a limited ability to admin the systems and things like that, and allow them just to do the things that they need to do to protect the service level and things like that.
Yeah. Very cool.
So this is kind of example. So here within vCloud Director, we can see the different tenants that we have, and within Rubrik here, we'll click this gear icon up on the right-hand side and go to organizations, and then these are the different organizations that we have set up here. So these, in this instance, these map the vCloud Director organizations that we have. When we go to log in,
and is that by association? Is that using VCD associations then to do that sort of mapping?
So in this case, they were created manually to match. So we have within our VCD plugin, we have scripts currently which will go and say, okay, you have 200 organizations within VCD here. Now we'll go and create them automatically in Rubrik in the future.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry, not using the automated. I guess the API kind of calls for associations, but manually or automatically able to associate then VCD sites to organizations, VCD organizations to
Rubrik
domains, or Rubrik organizations.
Rubrik organization.
Same nomenclature, right?
Yeah, we did that kind of deliberately as well, using the same nomenclature, so that it would be more. It would be easier for VCD customers to adopt this, basically.
Okay.
But yeah, we have scripts and things like that which can do that automatic mapping. Or I think in the future, then we'll have a button which will enable the customer once they add the vCloud Director instance within here, then to just go and create organizations for that for all the VCD orgs.
Okay.
So here we can see the different policies that we have assigned, and within our organization, it'll just go and show you in a second here. When we go to the tenant, we can set up that using this wizard here, which is what you'll use to configure the organizations. You can say this organization only has access to these particular SLAs. So here we're going to go and change that to say we want them to have access to these 6 instead of these 5. And then within here, this is going and taking a snapshot on demand, basically. But within this list here, then we can see we now have that additional policy available to us because the Rubrik admin's gone and enabled the tenant to have access to that additional policy. And then the tenant's able to go and use that through the vCloud Director plugin there. Or indeed, they could log in like this into the Rubrik UI, and then they'll see those 7 SLAs that they now have access to. They'll see those additional ones within here, basically, and they'll be able to use those policies within there as well.
Okay, it's running through it pretty fast, but I can see kind of what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, it's basically. Oh, sorry, go on.
Sorry, just one point to note there. So when you jump from VCD to Rubrik, you do have to authenticate again, or is that just a lab thing?
Yeah, so the VCD login is when VCD is talking to Rubrik, then it's using a shared credential that's been set up, like a service account, basically.
Yeah.
So when you go across into Rubrik, they'll be logging in, and it'll probably be the same single sign-on system that they're using, but yeah, it's going to be a separate authentication process because we're using the Rubrik authentication process, not the VCD one, to do that.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that means as well that you could have 100 users set up in VCD, but maybe you only want a couple of them to be able to access Rubrik. But I suppose this is one of the advantages as well of having that plugin within VCD is that those customers who are using that, then there's no need for the tenants to ever go and log into Rubrik. Basically, it's just the service provider can manage all of that themselves.
Got it.
So this is kind of the plugin. We saw a little bit of it there, but you can see a little bit over here on this screenshot, and we'll have a little bit more of a demo in a second, I think. But this is kind of the dashboard that customers will see, so they can see how many VApps they've got that are protected and how many are not protected. They can see the different policies and how those are being used within there. And then they have this drop down with reports here, so they can see different reports. So that could be a compliance report where you're saying, basically, I want a backup every 12 hours, and my workload's compliant with that requirement. And it's like a yes or no thing. They either are or they're not. Or there are other reports like capacity reports. How much capacity am I consuming as a tenant?
Yeah, that's important. Yeah.
How's that changing over time? Because that's probably something they're going to be interested in when it comes to getting their bills from the service provider. And reports like recovery jobs and backup jobs and things like that. So how many backup jobs are running? How were they successful and things? Recovery jobs and things like that. And then service providers can basically, if they don't want those specific reports to be visible to their tenants, then they can change that. They can request that as well for them to not be made visible. Because some service providers for storage consumption, for example, they don't charge based on that, or they don't. The customer doesn't need, their tenant doesn't need to be able to see that data based on their cost model. So in that case, then they may not want to share that report.
Okay.
Things like that. And then we've got this protection tab here, which is where what we saw in that demo a minute ago, but I think we'll see it again in a demo in a second. And that's where the tenant will go in and they'll be able to perform the tasks like recoveries, protection tasks, on-demand backups and things like that.
Yep.
And there's some detail on this available at build.rubrik.com. We've got another link at the end of the presentation as well, which will cover some of that. So this is some of the capabilities that the tenant has basically in terms of self-service. So being able to take that those on-demand snapshots. So they're wanting to upgrade their application or something. They want to take a snapshot before that happens to make sure that they can get back to it quickly if something goes wrong. Change of protection and which policies are assigned. Instant recovery and export, which we've covered in the demos earlier.
Yeah.
File and folder level recovery, which you asked about earlier. So that's available in there. And then reporting and monitoring for capacity, protection, recovery tasks and things like that. So I'll have a view of what tasks have taken place and things like that.
So that reporting and monitoring that we just saw, that was more like a high level sort of dashboard with some reporting URLs there. Is there more reporting available in Rubrik itself, or is it pretty much the same?
It's so those reports that we have within the VCD interface are lifted straight from Rubrik. So there are specific reports within Rubrik, and we can jump into our demo system and have a look at some of those reports in a minute, so you can see in a bit more detail what's available to tenants. And there are a few more options around being able to export those reports and things like that, schedule delivery of those reports via email, export them via CSV and things like that. So different use cases. Sometimes they'll be good, like maybe the service provider, and sometimes they'd be more interested in tenant and things like that. But that scheduling of reports and things is available as well. This is around access management. So talking about how the role-based access is set up basically. So you can map that organization within that VDC within vCloud Director to the organization within Rubrik, and then the user is going to be really limited to what they're able to see. So they won't be able to see someone else's organization. They won't be able to see objects you don't want. The service provider doesn't want them to be able to see.
And from an onboarding perspective, is it, you said at the moment there's scripts to kind of lift what existing organizations there would be in VCD. Is there a way to, I guess you can automate it from an order management system because it's all API driven, but is that typically what you see? Some new customer comes on, and is it more manual, create it in VCD, then Rubrik is able to kind of see it and discover it, or?
So a lot of the time, what we see when service providers move to Rubrik as a platform is that they'll move a few tenants across at a time. So maybe they're moving to a new VCD platform within their environment that's like been updated, and they're choosing a new backup platform for that. Or maybe they're moving from an existing backup provider or something like that to Rubrik. So typically what we see is that they'll want to do like a phased onboarding. So maybe bring 10 customers on at a time, or maybe one customer, or maybe 50 customers on at a time onto the Rubrik platform. So they could be scripting 50 organization creations based on what they can see through the VCD API or something like that. Or they could be manually creating them if there's a very small number until they've got everyone across onto it. And then I think longer term, especially in the very large service providers where they have many thousands of tenants, then they'll really be looking at having that automated onboarding process through some kind of ticketing system like ServiceNow or something like that. And as part of that, because of the automation capabilities, it's just going to be a few API calls to be able to go and create that organization in Rubrik at the same time as creating the VDC and all that kind of stuff and setting all of that up. So we can kind of slot into those onboarding processes quite easily.
Okay, good to know.
So this is showing more of the plugin that we have here. So you'll see this. We've got data management selected up here. So this will appear in this drop-down menu here. It will be data management, and this is that protection screen. So within here, you can see. Oh, it's jumping around a little bit, but here you can see the different VApps that we have available. I think it's
TV apps.
Yeah, we can see the different VDCs here, and if we go over to data protection, we can see the VApps here. We can go select one, and we can click assign protection up here, and we can go select the policy that we want to assign to, and it'll tell us the details of that policy, and then it'll go carry out that task for us, and it'll give us feedback straight away to say that that's changed. And then within the demo here, we're going to go in and we can see that policy has changed straight away. So that's gonna happen kind of straight away. I'll just pause it for 1 sec. So up here we can see we've got on-demand snapshot, which is being able to take that snapshot now of the VApp. We've got recover the VApp, which is that instant recovery we talked about, recovering files or folders, exporting the VApp, and then there's an events tab, which will show us all of the events that have happened for that specific VApp. So that's going to show us the different backups that have taken place, if recoveries have taken place, and show us the outcome of those actions as well. And over here we can see when the last backup was. So it's giving the tenant the ability to kind of see what's going on within Rubrik, and giving them a set of actions which are available across the different workloads that they have there.
Yeah, it's pretty comprehensive.
And there's obviously the dashboard, which we looked at a little earlier as well. So this is for an on-demand snapshot. So you can see which policy is assigned to it, but maybe you want to take the snapshot with a different policy. So maybe if it's just before we're doing an app upgrade, maybe we want to take the snapshot with just a week's retention or something, so we know we can get back to it if something bad happens, basically. And then we'll see the same task is happening across here because we made that API call, basically.
Yeah.
And we'll be able to monitor that task within VCD here as well to see what happens. We can see this the status is queued over here, so it's in progress still. Here we can see the export, which we talked about earlier. So we have the same options that we have available in the Rubrik UI. So we can send it to, we can do a full app or partial. We can select the different we can see all the snapshots that we have for that VApp, and then we can choose where we want to send it if we're exporting to a different VApp, if we want to export it to a different org. And then we can do network mapping and things like that within here if we need to. We can change the name for the VApp for when it's exported, so we can set that to whatever we want. When we're exporting the VMs, we can add a suffix to the VM name so it's clear that they came from this process, basically.
Yeah.
When we see them later, and again, that's just gonna we'll see it probably fire in a minute, but that's just going to go and carry out that task in the back end. So there's no real need for the tenant to necessarily log into Rubrik, but it's up to the service provider how they want to provide that kind of service, basically. Whether they want the tenant to log into here, there's no problem in doing that if they want to, or whether they want to just use the plugin to provide the tenant the service. But I think being able to provide this kind of self-service is very useful for the tenants, at least, so that they can carry out all these tasks through the interface that they're really used to.
And just while we talk about the interfaces, whilst this demo just runs for the rest of its workflow, the current support for VCD is it 10.2?
So right now we support from 9.5 up to 10.1. So we're working on 10.2 support just now. And
okay.
Yeah. I'm not sure when the expected time is for that to be completed, but it's a work in progress right now, anyway.
And that'll be downloadable from the link. I think you said you've something about putting a link up on the end.
Yeah, there's a link at the end, which is for the VMware Cloud Director integration, which we've shown here. For the core products, that's what's really supporting up to 10.1 right now. So the integration will be updated as soon as the product is to make sure it works with 10.2. But I think in terms of the code that we're using within the integration, then there's no reason it won't work with 10.2. It's just a case of the Rubrik backing system working with 10.2 as well.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right.
So that should be coming soon.
Yeah, it's nice that you get this nice dashboard as well here, which is really quite helpful to see a glimpse of your compliance as well.
Yeah. So being able to, I think when you're providing this kind of integration, then you need to be able to provide this level of detail really to the tenant so they can see what's going on and things like that, rather than just having a very base backup and recovery type workflow within here. Yeah. But so that's kind of what the plugin looks like there. So we have our PowerShell SDK is available from the PowerShell gallery as well, and that also includes the ability to automate. It includes commandlets to automate all of the things we just saw, like assigning assigning policies to VApps, recovering VApps, and taking on-demand snapshots, managing organizations, and things like that. So service providers or tenants who are wanting to do those kind of tasks using PowerShell, that's a super easy method of getting started with that.
Yeah, it's about 90% of all service provider operations units.
Yeah, well, I think there are definitely different opinions around which language they should be using. But PowerShell's certainly pretty ubiquitous anyway.
Yeah.
So this is kind of an example of that workflow. So basically connecting to VCD, assigning the SLA domain to some VApps, and then taking a snapshot and then doing an export. So all of these are available in a very simple way. And if people are used to using PowerShell, particularly the VMware PowerShell stuff, then they'll be right at home with this anyway.
Yeah.
So there's some more stuff which can be downloaded here and some more things to view. So there's some Lightboard videos here, which are linked to on YouTube. The PowerShell SDK, which we talked about. a reference architecture for Rubrik and vCloud Director, and then the extension itself is available at this GitHub site here. So
I'll make sure those links are in the video notes. That's
cool.
great.
Yeah, so hopefully
that's brilliant, Tim. I think we've covered quite a bit there. We've covered all of the integration capabilities and more, which has been really interesting to see. Any final thoughts on the integration from you?
No, just it's been. I think we released it maybe a year and a half ago or something like that, and it's been really encouraging to see the service provider customers that we have that are taking it up, and the feedback that we've been getting from them is great. So it's the more people that are using it, the better. But thanks very much for having us today, Guy. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Listen, thank you very much for all your information and the presentation. It's been pretty thorough kind of walkthrough of what Rubrik can do, and it certainly seems to me like there's a nice opportunity, particularly with the hybrid play. Actually, I was really impressed with that. It's one of the kind of the differentiators I think you've got there, which, like I said before, more and more of our service providers are having to address those needs for their customers, and that's actually a very nice kind of rolled up solution that you've got there, which nicely aligns to how we deliver our cloud solutions and operational models to remote sites and service providers as well.
Cool.
Brilliant. Well, listen, Tim, thank you so much for your presentation today and all your help. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks, Guy. Cheers.
Cheers then.